Hello everyone, this is Kayiu, back with Dodger, and today we're going to be doing a retrospective on Vastuum. One of the sets currently in the Revolution format was previously in Custom Standard, and unfortunately now is going to be rotating out of Revolution. So we're going to talk a bit about the cards that were strong role players that we're going to be sad to see go, some cards that we wish had seen more play or had been more impactful in their time, some cards which were showing themselves to have meta promise but came in too late or were discovered too late, and then finally cards that didn't see any play at all and that we were kind of surprised by. But with that, let's get into it.
I guess we should say to start off, this set was designed by Ruben, by the way.
Shout out to Ruben for making this dope set. And you'll be seeing some of the aesthetics and mechanics as we go through, but essentially it's a post-apocalyptic set with its own kind of flavor and twists on the general genre. So we're going to be starting off with Evaldi's masterpiece, and so one of those twists is that the land is populated by irradiated mutants, and Evaldi's masterpiece is no exception. So this is pretty powerful due to being able to dash it in, and then there was a land creature from Gariv that essentially allowed you to play this on turn 3 as ramp, while also being a flexible creature tutor.
Yeah, I think the play pattern of play this on turn 3 and ramp it out, ramp out a land, and then on your next turn you can either hardcast it or play it and attack for another 3 and get a 2-drop. I think that just the flexibility here is really huge, not only since it's a tutor, but also because there's kind of 2 modes of using it, where you can spend a turn just getting it into play, and then you can attack and get a really big creature on your next turn if you want. A card that I really wish I'd had the chance to play with, or I certainly had the chance, but I didn't take advantage of that, so it's going to be a bit sad that I never got to mess around with it. But I did see it used to great effect many times.
It definitely feels like a classic Dodger build around, especially since you were messing around with that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I would have played this in the Nivea deck that I ran, but I think that there's plenty of green-red, maybe even green-blue builds that could use this pretty well. Yeah. Okay. Alright, so next up we have Runic Sealer. And this one saw a lot of play, mostly because of how the meta turned out to be for a couple months. Featuring some pretty scary combo decks. And Runic Sealer comes with both a Pithing Needle and a Meddling Mage for the same card that you can name. Normally you can't name a creature, but it also has a 3/3 body, which is a bit bigger than most Hate Bears they usually get. So the fact that it's 3/3 means you can pretty reliably use it to swing around in combat for a couple turns without it definitely going to die. You know what I mean?
For sure. I think this is actually my pick for the card that is going to be most missed from the set. It was an insane sideboard piece for any white deck that was remotely aggressive, because you bring it in versus combos that can threaten to go faster than you, or control decks which had cards like Solara, Amoret, other wipes that could potentially slow your roll.
Yeah, and I think it was really boosted by the presence of Arbiter, Cyberscan Arbiter, because it actually let you look at your opponent's hand, meaning that you were guaranteed to be able to name something and prevent it from casting it as well.
That was a terrifying curve. We still have we still have Silent Hypnotist as this kind of effect but that's limited to blue-white, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see how the meta develops. Another hate we're going to be losing is Aether's Conservator. I think that this one is really strong and also potentially a little underplayed, honestly. Its ability to act as a Banisher Priest plus hand attack is really, really good. Flexible in different matchups. It saw a bunch of play in League in the Rapture Rejects, white-black colorless aggro decks. And I think without this, it's going to be disruptive aggro decks are going to have to take on a different color combination or bent, because Conservator really tied the deck together because it was good against aggro, but also good against the more controlling decks that would normally prey on small creature aggro.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to what you said. Mostly just that I think We'll talk about this more, but I think that the colorless aspect of mana bases that Vastuum provided was really cool. And and I think that people did a lot of cool things with it, but I still think there's even more cool stuff you could have done while it was around.
For sure.
Yeah, and like splashing for this is like a pretty cool thing. Yeah. All right. Next up, we have the Plipster Special, Eternal Wanderer, and Getting Lost. Both of these are tempo-based journey pieces. Honestly, I kind of feel like Getting Lost was the most important part of this package. Is that just me?
I actually think that Wanderer was like pretty flexible and could like, and like being a card advantage source in like some of the grindier games was like really good. I think Getting Lost was fine, but like, well, obviously more than fine. Like having a tap down that draws you a card is pretty insane, but like, I think that like Getting Lost on its own would not be worth putting in tempo, but since we had support from Embrace on Ending Frost, I think the 8x package really tied the room together. Well, I think Eternal was strong enough that it could have just seen play on its own, especially because tempo's kind of, or blue tempo doesn't have a great suite of 1-drops, or at least we have like Scuttling Gnat, but that requires a little more support. So
yeah, I think so. Where I disagree with you there is I think Getting Lost, when you combine it with other journey pieces, actually potentially represents multiple cards, because if there's like if there's a blocker that's holding back one of your other creatures from hitting and getting that card you previously journeyed, then locking down that creature is potentially worth a card in and of itself, if you get what I'm saying. But
that's fair.
Yeah, these two cards together definitely form a pretty formidable package. I think they ended up being a little less powerful in Revolution than in Custom Standard, mostly because of like just how they lined up into things, how there were like other very powerful things you could be doing for 1 or 2 mana that affected the board more. But definitely a very cool package, and it was always nice to see like the kind of unorthodox mono blue tempo succeeding.
For sure. Okay, next up we have Evaldi, Genesis of Hope. So this was kind of the centerpiece of a lot of mid-range brews, especially ones that tried to spam value enchantments. And also just like reusing creature ETBs, like getting landfall. Evaldi kind of had it all. The problem was at the start of the season, the meta was a little bit too fast for Evaldi decks to keep up too much, and towards the latter half, Dawnglade Wildbear has kind of taken over the value recur your pieces creature slot. Evaldi is still like an incredibly solid creature in its time.
Yeah, I agree. I do think Evaldi was a little underplayed. I actually won the very first Revolution tournament ever playing a green-red mid-range deck that centered around Evaldi to do different cute things like recurring Elvish Visionary, or letting you play a bunch of lands in one turn to trigger your Mountain Runt. Is that one? Yeah. Shout out to that guy. Love that card. So yeah, I just think like this card is very, very versatile. Like not only does it like literally ramp you because you can play it and then play it land immediately, but like also it just lets you do so many cool things while also just having really good stats. Like I don't know, it's just there's basically nothing. Yeah, there's basically nothing bad about this card. I would have to say.
For sure. Next up, we have Render Inert, which now that I'm thinking about it, we should have put with the other blue cards, but just as like
it's also different. It's also playing some non-tempo decks too, I think.
That's fair, yeah. But generally, it's just solid blue removal, and I think it's one of the, along with Entrapped in Ice from Sphereguard, it's one of the cards that made tempo actually have a lot of game versus aggressive decks. I mean, obviously, in addition to like the Getting Lost Embrace on Ending Frost package, but the ability to like not need a constant stream of cards to tap down creatures, and just be like, no, you're removed, and not have to go into another color for that was really huge. And I think losing Render Inert is going to be kind of painful. I'm not sure how often the artifact mode came up, but definitely valuable.
I think it would be pretty relevant in today's meta actually, because you can enchant the source.
Yeah.
Which is actually a flavor win because of the Stellar Spotlight nature of this card.
For sure.
And about how like literally the card depicts Karn deactivating the source.
I'm sad that didn't come up in tournament, because I swear that would have come up if we had another month.
Alright, so next up we have Starved Oasis. One of my favorite mana lands. We ended up having to nerf it before the format was released. Or we didn't have to nerf it, but we decided to. The card is really, really good. The Dread Statuary for 1 less mana definitely, like, has game. And paying 2 life is not, like, the end-all be-all, so this card mostly saw play, from what I remember, in big red decks, because those decks are just looking to chunk you out super fast, and having an extra way to just char your opponent from your lands is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I think it's all playing in some other aggro decks.
No, yeah, aggro decks, as long as they were not having like strong color requirements, definitely ran this because it's just free damage. It also, one synergy that I really love was that it paired very well with Ferocious Flame from Sphereguard because it has 4 power.
Ooh, yeah, it's a good combo.
Yeah, so like your opponent can be like, okay, phew, I've stabilized. I just need I can untap, play my Mercalt, and then you can just 8 them for out of nowhere. So, lots.
I guess Ferocious Flame won't be playable anymore now that we don't have Starved Oasis.
Yeah.
It was a joke.
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, so next up we have The Fall of Athanas. So this card actually took me by surprise with how good it is, but like it's a bit unassuming. But the fact that you get a Wrath in black, right, for 5 mana, which is about the cost that we allow Wraths to be around these days. Wow, I'm not talking well. Okay, but it sticks around and lets you just have a win condition without having to spend any more mana. Hersey had a very interesting take on how to use this properly in their Esper Control build, which was basically just set up multiple ice paths, naming a couple different colors, so that when you're wasting, you're actually just turning them into dual lands. I think that was a very cool problem. Yeah, and Hersey built a deck that basically it can win with like hitting you with Ghastly Spirits and whatever, but like it could also just be like, hey, I'm just gonna drain you out of Fall of Athanas after I kill all your stuff and you have nothing left. Like, that's really sick. So this card definitely surprised me quite a bit.
With it going, we won't have a reliable 5 mana wipe anymore, which is definitely something interesting, because it means that I think control decks, if they want to reliably Wrath, will probably have to invest in some ramp or be very like have a lot more removal, and they can't rely on hard wipes as much.
There is a planar cleansing in.
Yeah, there's a 6 mana from SRC, which is restructuring. There's also
Desolation from Sphereguard, right?
Yeah. There's also one from Kutalia. So
right.
Yeah, but now
so there's options, but nothing at 5 mana.
Yeah, nothing at 5 mana. I also and just before we move on, I do want to say I like how this interacted with Thin the Veil, because I think it's having a 5 mana wipe was healthy, but I think also not having it be tutorable by Thin was a pretty cool restriction on the card, maybe?
Yeah, I don't think that was intentional, but I think Ruben said, Ruben added that restriction so that, like, blinking it wasn't going to happen, and people, I don't know, resurrecting it, or whatever, yeah. Probably blinking it, mostly. Although I did have one gotcha moment where I tried to play it off of Sigrid the Hollow Queen, and then I realized that it just didn't trigger. Pretty sad. Yeah. Alright.
Next up
we have
lands. I think we're going to be sad to lose because they provided some powerful fixing for the format, and more importantly, fast fixing. So
these things actually do a lot, all of them.
Yeah, Abandoned Excavation, which is huge, as like despite only being a 10-do ice bridge or whatever.
Which was a good card. It was a good card.
Yeah. Like it really helped tricolor decks like have fast mana reliably early in the game, but not so consistently that it became a problem.
Yeah, and it was also great when you were running Remnants or other cards that wanted you to waste, because you could just use once you already use the charge, it's kind of just a free waste because it's already a colorless land that doesn't do anything. Mm-hmm. So that was very nice to have.
Also, bouncing
Speaking of remnants,
and Dawnglade Wildbear was pretty poggers.
that's true too. Yeah. Speaking of the remnants, I think the remnants actually just did a ton of work, and I feel like people should have been playing them more. I think that they had a lot of interesting play to them because you have to be careful about like what you're wasting. There's room for like a good player to make maximum use of the remnants, and if you make a mistake, you could actually end up like messing up your mana. Or sometimes you might have to choose between, okay, do I want double red or double black available?
And I think there's an interesting tension between their fast fixing lands, but they're also fast fixing lands that you ideally don't want to play on turn 1, because then you have to waste them.
Right. Yeah. One other thing that remnants did that you won't be able to do anymore is you can actually save them if your opponent shield breakers you can play the remnant and turn off, like you can flip over the land that you put the rust counters on, and it loses the rust counter ability.
Yeah, that happened to me with another card we're going to be discussing, the Source. So like, it was just kind of one of the many interesting ways to have counterplay to effects, which usually are kind of difficult to deal with in terms of like targeting lands. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Finally, Neglected Nexus. I think this card is. It seems like I was the only person playing this card, but I was always very impressed with it. I mean, it's just Evolving Wilds, but better, and we know how good Fabled Passage is. I don't think this is on the level of Fabled Passage, but like, just the fact that it can be an untapped land if you want, whenever you want, as long as you have one waste in your deck and like have the colored mana restrictions otherwise or requirements otherwise, then like this can actually provide a lot of flexibility to your mana base, especially if your deck also wants to use colorless mana. But I even ran this in like a Naya deck that I just used it as like, if I need to play a 2-drop and this is my only second land, I can just get my one waste and I'm good to go.
Yeah, and like I think it provides a grave fodder for cards like Stoic Sentinel and Thin the Veil, which I think
that was also really important.
Yeah. So overall, Neglected Nexus just unassuming, but really did it all, and I think
for sure.
People are definitely going to be expecting the Abandoned Excavation, the Remnants, to have an impact on mana-based building. I think that the presence of Neglected Nexus is going to be a little bit more of a sleeper loss, or people won't realize how good it is until they don't have access to it. Yeah,
mana bases in general are definitely going to get a bit worse. I don't think they'll be like that much worse, but it'll definitely be like slightly harder.
You have to trade in the speed that you.
I think it'll just be you have to be a little less greedy on color requirements in your deck, probably. Yeah. Okay. Next up we have. You go ahead.
Yeah, this is just a quick one. Sandscald. This joined Burning Dawn. Usually it was copies like 5 through 6 or 5 through 8 of Burning Dawn as just a density of chars in Big Red. Good removal, can go face. What's not to love?
I don't think I ever saw it killing. I think it will make Big Red a little worse because part of the strength of Big Red is just being able to throw a bunch of chunks of massive burn at your opponent's face. And just having consistency in that is like nice. But Big Red has other good options, so I don't think it'll be like the deck's bad now or anything.
For sure.
I don't think I ever saw this kill an indestructible creature, which I'm a little bit sad about.
Oh yeah.
But yeah.
I don't think we have too many of those, but yeah. And the last up for the cards that had a solid role and that will be sad to see go section of this, Supply Raid. I think this is probably the least played out of any of the cards in this section, but I think it was still very solid as like good hand attack for aggressive decks and good. I
chose to run 4 of it in my GP deck this month.
Okay.
Yeah, in my sideboard. I think that if you're going to sideboard a discard spell, this is the best one to do so, because most of the time when you're bringing in hand attack, you're not bringing it in against aggro decks, and those are the decks that are going to make Supply Raid useless anyway. So if you just throw in your sideboard, you never have it against aggro, and otherwise, like, you're playing versus control, this card's just sick, it's Thoughtseize, right? You're playing versus...
Don't lose life, forehead.
Yeah, exactly, you're playing versus midrange. Well, most of the time, you can at least, once you've gained control of the board, you can take whatever's going to let them hit you, Or if you play it early, you can, again, take whatever is going to let them, like, develop their board and hit you. So I think most of the time this card is, as long as your deck has like a decent amount of removal and or blockers, like this card is pretty much Thoughtseize in the right matchup. So yeah, I definitely thought it was more people should have been playing it.
For sure. And I think that's probably a good transition into the next section, which is cards that were found too late. So stuff that was showing strong meta promise, only kind of had the chance to bloom or show its stuff this month.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
The first of these is kind of going to be a triple or quintuple feature of cards from Colorless Ramp. And
Yeah.
The first is one that we've been talking about in reference a few times here, which is the Source. So for 5 mana, you get an indestructible artifact. You can waste and non-waste lands to add 3 mana any combination of colors, which is strong on its own. But as long as you control 7 or more lands that can produce colorless, you can play cards you own from outside the game, which is just stone cold insane. Obviously, like,
It's basically Gilda's Lotus with a massive upside, and there's a small requirement of like being able to produce 1 colorless mana at some point, you know? Otherwise, yeah, it's pretty much Gilda's Lotus with upside.
Yeah, and like, if you ever turn it on, the game is basically just over, because you just stack your sideboard with insane ramp. Like, obviously,
You're guaranteed to at least have 10 mana because of its ability, right?
Yeah. And like ramp, like the problem with ramp is obviously the A plus B problem, and this emphatically solves that by being like, hey, you do the ramp, I'll take the rest. And not
exactly.
do more cards, but the best cards you can get. So
I think people generally did stuff like cast Kayiu Champion and then like an extra turn spell to just like attack with a bunch of things.
Yeah. Or there was like extra turn, like, because we had Borrowed Time, which is a 2 mana extra turn spell. There was also like it's like Kayiu Champion, but there's also like Eradicator Engine and a Thanos Conservator out of the board if you need interaction for some reason. And like, lots of stuff like that. So it was just
cool deck. So we can talk about some of the other cards in that deck. I think the biggest piece that makes the deck work is Landscape Decay, because not only does it accelerate you up to 7 lands, but it also lets you get specific lands from your deck. And in the case of using the Source, you actually want to waste your stuff. So the waste 2 actually is less of a downside than it looks at first glance.
Yeah, and I know in the green colorless ramp decks, they would get stuff like Healing Center and Glyph Circle, which have ETB effects, and then just immediately waste them. Because it's like, oh.
Yeah, it also works.
And Landscape DK really tied the room together, because going 2 mana ramp spell into Landscape DK was just off to the races. 3 cards which I think showed up in some capacity this tournament that I was surprised not to see more of earlier was Eradicator Engine, Eon Overwatch, and Liminal Observer, which I have named the Colorless Bros. Liminal Observer and Eon Overwatch in particular were kind of like just huge houses in their time in Custom Standard, and they kind of were not super explored when Revolution, or kind of came quietly. And I think part of that is obviously that I think the colorless mana base changed a little bit since we no longer have a 5-color remnant, but I still think that they were underplayed / should have been played more before this tournament.
I think in general with Vastuum, people generally had like kind of card fatigue with the set, since it had been around for a long time. People often were more likely to explore some of the newer stuff. Obviously, that doesn't account for everything, but I think that was a factor for some of these cards. Especially, like, I think with regards to Liminal Observer in particular, people often think like, okay, you need to be like all in on the colorless thing to actually make use of these cards. But I just like literally flashed a couple of Liminal Observers into my otherwise black-red deck, and I was able to like reasonably cast them off of Neglected Nexus, Ice Path, and Remnants. And Liminal Observer did solid.
You have Abandoned Excavation and Starving Oasis as very powerful lands that can also
So like there's a lot of room to just like kind of splash these into your meta base, like just like with a Thanos Conservator. Yeah. Sweet. Oh boy.
Is the Hyena pack, starting off with Vlad Pack Mother. So Hyenas was kind of it was a very strong aggro deck in Custom Standard because there was also additional Hyena support from Scriptures of Urshad. Here, though, all the Hyena support had to come from within the set. And while it had been played a bit in the early months of Custom Standard, it was basically like a specialist deck. Like, the only person playing it was Kilgaris, and other aggressive decks took the forefront, particularly Experience, because of its explosive potential. Hyenas, though, really showed up this tournament. I believe it's now in the finals, in contention to win the GP. And
just won yesterday.
And I think lots of that is due to like Dash lining up really well into the
exactly. People are running a ton of sorcery speed. Sure, yeah. So people are running a ton of sorcery speed, like more unconditional removal, to deal with like experience threats, but also like if they flip an experience threat, you want to be able to kill that, right? People are running a lot of Burning Dawn because Burning Dawn's a really good card. There's also just kind of like not that many cheap instant speed removal spells. Like there's Ferocious Flame, but most decks usually just lean on that. So if your opponent plays like Death Ridderly on turn 2, and they're on the play, or like you stumble a little bit, like what are you supposed to do? That's a 3/3 haste menace that is coming down every turn for 2 mana. A lot of the other stuff is pretty cheap, and they're just like there's also just inevitability to the deck because they have Instincts of Attack, which is if they just combine it with dashing, it's like you're gonna die at some point. So you can either try to race them, or like have instant speed removal, or like you can try to out life game them. But generally, it's like if you aren't prepared to beat this deck, it will kill you. Like that's what I was just very impressed by.
I definitely underestimated Instincts of the Pack because I was like, yeah, the dash ability isn't that good. The real thing is just attaching a shock to every dash is just insane because the repeatable burn, like on top of having removal resistant creatures, is so good. Yeah, and having the suite of Rabid Whelps plus Vlad whatever as like 8 1-drops means that you usually have a very strong aggressive curve. Honestly, I think the weakest part of Kilgaris' deck was actually the mana base because there were way too many swamps when the deck was heavily red focused. But that's really just like a quick mana base swap out rather than any of the cards being individually weak. Yeah. Definitely, I'm excited to see how it does in the finals, and I definitely wish that we'd seen more of this deck because it seems really cool as like.
I think if this deck had seen more play, you would have seen a lot of changes in what people were running as removal spells, which it was one of the best things about standard format. So it's a shame it came so late, basically.
For sure. Next up is another aggressively oriented card, but in a different avenue. It's Travel Together. So this was another card that was a house in Custom Standard due to a lot of factors. But, mostly because it didn't have the once each turn, I believe. So it was also a combo engine. But here it was just solid in a lot of like token aggro decks, which I think, again, like lots of people started to focus on Experience as like the best aggro deck. And then like this tournament we have people exploring like token aggro and doing fairly well with it, and Travel Together is just one of the many ways that the deck can quickly recover from opposing wipes or build up a massive deck early.
The Sonum deck is another aggro deck that will eat your face if you aren't prepared to deal with it. And this is just kind of like it's another payoff that you can use with all these like token stuff that you're jamming together. So the loss of this actually does make the Sonum deck fairly weaker because it's just it's like you're losing another payoff, basically.
For sure.
Yeah.
Unlike Hyenas, which is completely decimated by rotation.
Like the Sonum deck there's probably going to be other stuff that'll work with it, so like I wouldn't say the deck's dead, but losing this card is a loss, yeah.
For sure. Okay.
Next up we have Warpath Minotaur. This guy's always been fun. He is a 5-mana 4/4. 5/4. Comes with the Journey. So that's already really sweet. And in some situations, you can force your opponent's creatures to suicide, which is kind of sick. He's seen play in, I believe, Jund, in Naya, in some black-red decks, Big Red.
Yeah, I think Big Red mostly just as like a backup target to make sure that like Sermon of the Way has additional targets.
This guy's good with Sermon of the Way, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
If you hit, then you just get a card back, so you didn't even like lose anything from playing the ritual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is one of the 4-drops, which I think people in red decks were more focused on Wilderkin and Merciless Shieldbreaker, but this one also had its own niche that I wish was explored or like tried a little bit sooner.
Yeah, the thing about Revolution is just there are so many good 4-drops right now that like some are just gonna fall to the wayside a little bit. I wouldn't say this guy fell to the wayside because like he saw some solid play, but like yeah, definitely had a lot of competition. Yeah.
Okay.
Ooh.
I know the next few are your babies, so you want to.
Yeah, so these are the Minnow Bros. There's Blood Rage Brawler and Redarn Butcher. They're both just big Minotaurs that make you discard a card on ETB. Redarn Butcher can dash as well, which means that you're going to have to be discarding multiple cards potentially, but also like 2 mana for 4 power haste is kind of sick. And also if you either... Oh, sorry.
The format is like replete with ways to like turn that into card advantage.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you're discarding cards you want to discard, or your hand's empty, then great. These cards have no drawback, right? So something I like to do with these is use them to I mean, you know me, Kayiu. I always like to animate. I like to reanimate creatures, but not the big ones. So I would combine these with Bloodstitch Tupilok and the 1 Grieve card that hits a creature with mana value 4 or less to cheat out like 4-drops on turn 3. But you can do funny stuff like Twister of Shadows, which gets around the drawback of having to have 2 little life. And that deck event was a meme, but it eventually became my GP deck, which was kind of just like a black-red mid-range deck focused around a lot of 4-drops. And you could either use these to dump those out and then copy them with Bloodstitch Tupilok, or just play these as like solid creatures, and they do stuff like enable. They do stuff like enable Ferocious Flame. They can discard your Burning Dawns or your Realize the Delicate Ideals or whatever. Also, Redarn Butcher turned out to be very useful for me because a lot of the time, like I would discard a card that I didn't really need, and then the card was just unkillable because every time I played Big Red, you play a creature with 5 toughness. They basically need Banish to the Ice, or they're not going to kill it. So, like, that was just, I don't know. Yeah, Redarn Butcher did a lot of work. Blood Rage Brawler was okay, but didn't line up great into what people were playing.
Yeah, definitely gonna miss the schnoz on Butcher.
Yeah. Anyway, I will miss the Minnow Bros. They were fun. Yeah.
Okay, another aggressive package that was kind of put into practice just this month was Path of Resilience and Path of Brutality, which both journey, a mechanic we mentioned earlier, and give bonuses to creatures if you have a journeyed card. And this really started to shine with Dawnglade Wildbear, because when you think value enchantments, obviously you want to reuse them, bounce them, but Evaldi was kind of awkward on the curve for that. Dawnglade, meanwhile, slotted in perfectly between these and could be used to turn 1 Path of Resilience, turn 2 Dawnglade, turn 3 swing for 10, while also having it being indestructible, and you get to bounce back the Path of Resilience so you can keep journeying cards, which was a terrifying combination which made, I think, did it make top 8 or just top 10?
It made top 8 with Froggy.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, we definitely had a strong showing this tournament, and
I think Path of Brutality in particular has been like a very notorious card from the set for a long time. Right?
I think Path of Brutality did do some cool stuff in Custom Standard, but I don't know. It was definitely not to like a tournament-winning degree, if I remember right. But I could be misremembering.
Yeah.
But definitely, like, Brutality is definitely the more well-known of the two by far. But Resilience is still a sleeper.
I feel like Ruben said it was one of the best cards in the set in Custom Standard.
Got you.
Maybe I'm just
No, I could definitely be misremembering.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, next up we have
to bounce. We have for the tournament, which I know Drake was trying out at the start of the format, but then it was like, it doesn't hit flip DXP threats. It's a little too slow. But started to see played this month in the Jund deck, which is currently in the finals. Again, Dawnglade Wildbear coming in very clutch for these bounceable enchantments.
I think just having extra permanence is nice too. It's always nice in case your opponent shield breakers you or whatever other random stuff's going on. Like if you're playing it by itself, it's still Moment of Craving with like slight upside, but not instant speed. And there's always going to be ways to like take advantage of this being enchantment. So it was just kind of like a nice little, I don't know, value piece that also is just like good removal. So I don't know, like fairly unremarkable card. I don't think we ever saw any dedicated -1/-1 counter decks with the Vastuum stuff, but still a nice little piece.
For sure.
Alright, next up we have Nomad's Companion, which is a little cat. And basically it is a pretty solid one-drop for token aggro decks. I believe it was in the Sonum deck, or at least it should have been.
It was.
Okay, yeah. Besides that, I'm not sure where else it saw play. I don't think the like kind of most conventional white aggro decks were running it.
Yeah, it saw play in green-white tokens before, but that was kind of it like wasn't as good as the Sonum deck. In the Sonum deck, this tournament was definitely the breakout performance for Companion. Having a one drop that sometimes can like swing for 4 or 5 is just gas. Obviously,
I think if you move this card into MCM or a format with like more dedicated token support, like this card would be a big house.
And it's common. Like I love to see. But I feel like the set from top to bottom really has like cards that are like not powerful because they're overpushed, but powerful because they do interesting synergistic things. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool.
Sweet.
And with that, we're finishing off the cards that had their time too late, stuff that just showed up this month section. Next up is going to be cards that we wish were explored more, which are cards that were played to some degree, that they were noticeable, but really weren't iterated on or explored as much as we think they should have been. The first of these is Fugue, Indulgent Broker. Yeah. This guy's just a really solid 4-drop planeswalker. You can come down, just kill a thing, or just 2-for-1 them. +1ing an opponent over and over is like really game winning, especially versus control. And I think that as like a Magic player, you're always taught that like, hey, cards that give your opponents choices are worse than they appear. But lots of the time, like Fugue, like while it is a downside of what Fugue can do, the rate at which he does stuff is still just gas.
Yeah, oftentimes where like if you -3, your opponent actually doesn't get a choice anyway.
Yeah.
So like that helps quite a bit. It's also like if your opponent, like sometimes if your opponent has more than one card that they really want to keep, well, like they still won't have a great choice even with the +1. So that's kind of the secret to making Punisher cards, is like just make it so it's extremely unlikely that your opponent ever gets a decent outcome, I guess. That's the way to think about it.
So Fugue saw some play in mono black mid-range / control, but not much outside that. And I think definitely more mid-range decks could have explored and tried him out.
Yeah, I think this is a card that just kind of suffers from the general like very high density of 4-mana haymakers. In the format. Yeah.
I mean, and speaking of that, the next card is also a 4-drop haymaker, Nivea, Last of the Aethanis. So, essentially has a Conjurer's Closet ability where you can, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile a permanent, return it back, and you can also just, if that permanent is an artifact, you can keep casting copies of it. And this seems like really good. I'm especially thinking of stuff like Chamber of Penance, where you can just get some opponents out of the game by having infinite artifact O-rings. Of course.
Yeah, you can also use this with the Glyph of Protection.
Yeah, Glyph of Protection.
Very cheap. Strong card every turn.
Yeah, also another card on this list, Wall of Mysteries, which is just Wall of Omens / Wall of Blossoms in blue. But yeah, I think
what this card is from is that you have to wait an entire turn to start getting value off of it. You also need to have other things, and it has 4 toughness, so most things in the format that people play to kill creatures will kill it. So I think it kind of suffered from that a little bit.
For sure. I think also being in the same set as whatchamacallit, Evaldi, when I think Evaldi.
Yeah, Evaldi is often like a more efficient way to bounce your own stuff. I agree.
Even though it doesn't generate card advantage or have free flickers like Nivea, being one color coming down on the curve earlier, it just mattered so much more.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's probably like a deck that could have played both, or a deck that would have been more focused on artifacts that wasn't playing green. So this card definitely
only saw play in the Monument to the Fall, not Monument to the Fall, man. Monument to
the 30.
Monument to the 30 deck, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, I think could have seen play elsewhere.
Okay, yeah. And Wall of Mysteries is our next card, right?
Yeah, I mentioned it briefly, but yeah, it's our next card.
Yeah. Wall of Mysteries, I don't know. Wall of Omens is a great card. Wall of Blossoms is a great card. Wall of Mysteries is also a great card. Not much else to say there, I think.
Yeah.
Like, I think in general, just blocking stuff was not often what you wanted against aggro, because creatures would like grow by themselves, and you kind of just need to murder them.
I think experience in the main aggro deck is really what put Wall of Mysteries out of commission.
Yeah, it's like if you want to be aggro, usually you just have to like mercilessly kill all their dudes.
Yeah, or your 2-drop has to be something that can like effectively trade. Or
I think this would have been better if we had better wraths, because then you could just like blocking some stuff for a while and then wrathing would have been a more viable strategy.
Yeah. As it is, like turn 2 helping hand didn't help out. Okay. The next card is I think one that you've played with, so I'm gonna.
Oh yeah, Shimmering Doonkite. Crazy good card. First of all, it's your classic like 5 mana, 4 power haste, flying haste dragon, right? There are literally like about 20 of these in canon, I feel like, or maybe not 20, but like at least 10. And like I don't know. There's a reason they keep making them. They play well. They're strong. They're like it's good to have one in standard. This one not only does that, but it also can copy all your things, which understandably is very powerful. It's essentially granting haste plus doubling the ETBs of all your creatures. There's a lot of really strong combos you can do with it in Revolution right now. The most notable is probably Elemental of Surprise. Either, like if you play Elemental and then this, it's good because you hit them for 10. Or if you play this and then play Elemental, it's also good because then you hit them with 2 5/5 hastes, or 2 4/4 hastes. Oops.
Yeah. Also, like Merciless Shieldbreaker, because again, anything that gives that card haste is quite good.
That's actually 3 Merciless Shieldbreaker triggers too. That's rough.
Yeah. I was playing versus I think Platy People's green-red tokens ramp, and despite having a bunch of fodder, that was an easy game on the spot.
That's sick. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I just think this card's like really good, and it's good with a lot of other things. So
yeah,
I
think 5 mana. Like the format was fast enough that I think people were like a little low on like 5 mana threats, but really like you can play like an aggressively oriented mid-range deck with this and just like still dome people pretty effectively, and I wish we'd seen a little more of it this month. But yeah, overall just good card.
Sweet.
Next up is Find of a Lifetime. So 5 mana, discard your hand, draw 7 non-lands. This can just like you can just outvalue like mid-range or control opponents and make them cry. It only ever saw play in the first, I think, I don't know if it ended up in the final version, but in the first GP winning deck, which was Shoot the Moon combo.
It was in the final version.
It was in the final version, okay.
Yeah. I played it. It was a one-of, but I played it.
Yeah, as a way to just gas all the way back up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a card where, like, I feel like part of it is just being in blue-red makes it hard to fit into a variety of decks, but it's still, yeah.
It's sort of like, it's a little unclear exactly which deck wants to play it. You know what I mean? I think maybe some decks that maybe should have invested more into it would be like some kind of Timur ramp. but it was also like decent in the Shoot the Moon deck. Because usually if you draw 7 non-lands, you just win the game next turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know.
I liked how it provided an alternate plan, because usually it's just like you interact with the combo, they die. But it gave
That deck has like a million ways to win the game. Yeah. Alright, cool. Next up we have Grin's Reaver. It is 2 red for a 2/1 first strike. Whenever it hits a player, you exile top card of the library, and then until the end of your turn, you can play it. If it's a spell.
Yeah, this is just,
Which, yeah, I don't know, good card.
yeah, it's just a good card. Like, I saw Fozzer playing it in like black rent mid range, but not many other people. And I think it's a card that like it's an aggressive. It like you could call it an aggressive red Bob to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Ragavan do things. This card's obviously not Ragavan, but fairly close. First strike helps it get in, actually, quite a bit. And it does just do all the color fixing for you, so you don't need to like rely on the treasures to do that for you. So yeah, I don't know. I think this card's like pretty good. I think it was more like the decks that would have run it would have usually opted into other things like Flametail Lizard for the experienced decks. I think mono red decks, like of the traditional aggro variety, haven't really been seeing that much play, although I think they probably should have been, at least a little bit. And this card probably should have been in those decks.
For sure. Next up is Grin himself.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's just he's a little awkward on curve, despite the crazy value you can get out of just copying a bunch of burn or removal and just killing your opponent dead.
Shown up in the Emblem Visionary deck that people haven't really played with yet.
Yeah, I think that like getting more cantrips next season will make spells-ish decks.
We also get Freeze Fire in Viridian's last mission, which is a pretty good card. So.
And yeah, I think I'm sad because I feel like Grin is one of those cards which is ostensibly quite good, but has not really had a chance to shine in either format it's been in.
Yeah, one of these days we'll get around to building another deck with him in MSCM.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, continuing the red train, we next up have Insistent Lightning, which has seen play in Big Red, and Dork in Distress has always joked about making it their promo if they win a GP with Big Red. But yeah, I think overall it's inefficient for its cost, but its ability to be card advantage is fairly relevant. And I think that like it's
card advantage, I think it's just like murder them. Like this card is actually, I think it's a better Devil's Play.
I mean, card advantage in the sense that it's 2 cards in one.
Well, I guess the fact that like you're not always hellbent, so it might be a little difficult, but like it's pretty comparable to Devil's Play. Obviously, the first half being worse is a fairly big deal, but you can always discard this or mill it over or whatever,
Okay, next up is Ruin Stormworm. I mean, 7/6 for 5, pretty good beater, but really there've been there was some discussion of a deck with this Moonlight and Prophet of the Veil, I believe is the name, where there was like an infinite combo where you could just look at the top card of your library.
Don't like the strats. Don't like the strats. They don't know. The public doesn't know.
But yeah, it was like people talked about it. It was, I think someone took it to League once, but it didn't really catch on. And I think if we had a bigger player base, there might have been more people willing to try it out and tune it.
I think it's more like people just like in this meta, like when you're looking for a 5-drop, you're looking for more consistent inevitability and or murdering your opponent right away. Mm-hmm. And this card like is big, but oftentimes it's not actually as big as some of the other things people are doing, like the source, or like oftentimes like if you really want the haste, you could just play like Shivering Dune Kite, and that would also like give a bunch of creatures haste. So I feel like this card could have seen play in another format, but not this one, which was a little unfortunate.
Got you.
Yeah. Because even when I looked at it, I was like, excuse me, how many stats?
For me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the last card in this section is another card that was a custom standard all-star. It's Sandwarp.
Yeah, notably it was a little different.
it was actually factually free, which changes the dynamic a lot. But even as a one-mana counterspell, I think I think the real honest answer is we didn't really have many traditional control decks.
I think this could have been played in Hersey's control deck as like a 1 or 2 of.
For sure, because that deck is already very reliant on ice paths, and it's just being able to like tap out for a win con or like tap out for a Tindavale or a Ghastly Spirit and then still have interaction up is just gravy.
Yeah, I think the problem is like making sure that you're able to like actually cast spells after you cast this, or win the game after you cast this because you're doing some degen combo thing. Like I think maybe actually Shoot Moon should have been playing this, because like if your opponent tries to stop you from winning the game, you can just pay 1 mana and like okay, I've wasted some lands, whatever, you know.
Yeah. To be fair, you could already do that by having a second glyph. Just
like I don't know if Vastuum gets into MCM one of these days, this card's going to be insane. I think for combo decks. Yeah. But yeah, it's just a cool card. I'm glad that it wasn't free counter magic because I think that just does a lot of weird things.
Does not play well.
It needs to be like a I don't know, conscious thing you do. I wouldn't say it inherently plays badly, but it needs to be a conscious thing you do, and we consciously don't want that. So yeah.
Or like I think it goes against what we would want for a standard format, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. All right.
Okay, so the next section is why was nobody playing these? Basically, just all the cards that have seen even less play than the cards in the previous section.
Basically zero.
Yeah, basically zero, and that we think definitely should have seen a little or a lot more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Starting off is Aether Conductor, 2/3 for 1 colorless, and when it attacks, you put a charge counter on it. Then you may put a permanent with convert mana cost equal to or less than the charge counters onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Notably, I think people didn't play this because they misread it, because that says permanent, so you can use this as ramp. You can in all cases.
Technically, Chef did run this in their 4/1 weak deck that was just all colorless.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically a Tron-esque, but besides that, I don't think, or Shops-esque, sorry. Besides that, I don't think we saw a ton of play, mostly because I feel like there's a little bit of tension here where like you want to waste lands early to play this, or play like colorless lands early, but if you're playing an aggro deck, oftentimes most of the rest of your stuff, like, you don't get a ton of lands, so if you're not playing lands that produce colored mana, you might not be able to play your other threats.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where the tension comes here. I think that in a smaller format with less cards available, it's harder to build an aggro deck that's both good and like also supports this card. While I think it would be one of the best cards in the set for MCM, I think that in Revolution there just weren't really the tools to make this a worthwhile inclusion in your deck, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of MSCM, I think our next card is one that is in the format thanks to thanks to New Horizons, Evaldi's Muse, which, yeah, again, this is a card which ostensibly should have been very good for mid-range decks. It gains you a bunch of life to stabilize against aggro. If you played in the same deck as Evaldi himself, you can just loop it. Same with Nivea. This one, again, it comes back to the glut of 4 drops.
Yeah, it's just another victim of that, I think. This card's pretty good. I think the problem is, like, it doesn't do exactly the thing you want in very many matchups. You know, it's like, okay, it gains you a life against aggro, and then it can gain you more if you, like, have more creatures. And, you know, it blocks and dies and makes 2/1/1s. It's fine, but it's not gonna save you from the strongest aggro draws. And in mid-range in control matchups or mid-range matchups, it's like, okay, I gain a couple life, you know, like, we're trading. But it's like, it's not...
Just play Merciless Shieldbreaker and lock them out of the game. Just play Wilderkin and lock all of the removal out and kill them dead. that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this card could be really strong with like if you had more of a blink package. I ran it with Shimmering Doomkite a little bit. It was fun there. Also good with Evaldi himself, obviously. But yeah, I think there were a lot of factors that made it so that this card didn't like perform super well.
Got you, yeah.
Right. Next up is Gene Shifting. I think I'm glad that this card didn't see much play because the deck would have been good and would have been pretty degenerate. And that's Polymorph. It was changed after some testing before the card was launched to activate on your opponent's end step instead of your end step, which thankfully made it much worse for Polymorph because your opponent gets a whole ass turn to deal with the Gene Shifting creature.
Gene Shifting is funnily enough the card. I think it's been nerfed twice because it used to be 2U. It's a card that has done the least in custom formats that I think has been nerfed the most out of Vastuum, and I think that's funny. But like, I mean, it's definitely a terrifying card. We also had shifting forms, or eyes on shifting forms. In the end, Reanimator ended up being the big cheat out deck of choice. But Gene Shifting is definitely Gene Shifting plus shifting forms is a deck that I think we had a lot of eyes on pre-format. A little sad that no one tried it, but also a little bit of relief.
Some people play shifting forms.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen people play Gene Shifting in that deck, but it's not out of the question. You might, I think, I might get something later.
Yeah, shifting.
Yeah. Next up we have Leyline Feeder. So it is a 2 mana for 2. And you pay 2 mana and waste a non-waste land you control to get it +2/+2 in hexproof until end of turn. Your chance are pretty solid rate. It doesn't cost double green, so you can run in a deck that's wasting lands and like reasonably cast it. Mm-hmm. It's like it has inbuilt protection. If you have lands up, your opponent basically can't cast Removal Spell on it. It's also kind of hard to block. Your opponent will have to make you invest some resources into that. So I kind of feel like this card should have seen play in the green Stompy decks and like Brutality and stuff.
It just feels like it naturally should have found a home in the Stompy decks. And I
don't think I would play it anywhere besides that.
Yeah, like if we had a better Boggles package, maybe, but not really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really consider this a Boggle because you have to like hold up mana to get it back. But it's definitely not a bad card.
Yeah, I think it should have seen play in Stompy is where I landed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next up is Leyline Feeder, which
we just did Leyline Feeder. Next up is Leyline Reaper.
Leyline Reaper, sorry, the cousin.
Yeah. This card, okay, I think this card was very underplayed. If you've ever played with Wasteland Strangler, that card is an absolute house. This card, you don't actually have to jump through a hoop. You can just, you just do it. You just play like 1 or 2 copies of it in your deck, so you don't have the extra copies, you don't get hands where you draw 3 of these and you're like, oh, I can't do this multiple times. Mm-hmm. But as long as we've already talked about how to mitigate the cost of wasting using Ice Path or Mana Excavation or just playing colorless cards in your deck. I don't know. I just think this card should have been played more.
I mean,
because it is very efficient.
It's mini Choop.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't know. Sweet card. Wish it was played more.
For sure.
Next up we have
Mirage Oddity, which was a big player as like a win con for control decks in custom standard. I think here it gets edged out by Paper Trail Elemental from SRC because that one has flash, same stats, and also generates card advantage.
It's interesting because it was also available. Paper Trail was also available on Custard, but according to Ruben, Mirage Oddity edged out Paper Trail.
I think the reason for that is because Paper Trail was actually changed. It used to be like 5 mana and have different stats. Like it was like a 5 mana for 5, and maybe it didn't have flash. I don't remember. I just remember that it was changed substantially before Revolution. So.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think this card's fine. I think the fact that I don't know. I guess it doesn't kill fast fast enough to justify not having flash to me when you compare it to Vapor Trail. And I feel like in Control these days, you don't actually care about whether or not your win con is killable or not, because you're not playing that many Control mirrors. It's more about like what can allow me to kill my opponent without sacrificing too much tempo when my opponent's trying to kill me, you know? So I don't think Mirage Oddity lines up well. If you're playing a lot more Control mirrors, then I could see Mirage Oddity being a really good card, though.
For sure. Okay, the next up is a card that I feel like should be After Your Own Heart.
Yeah, I always wanted to try to play this card, I just never got around to it. Same thing with Lost. I mean, it's got solid stats. It's a 3-mana, 2/3 flying lifelink. Like, that's good stats. And it can unearth things, or it can get you 2 1-drops whenever it attacks. Again, like, the waste thing is like, it's a cost, you can't do it forever, but like, just doing it once is enough to say, oh, I got tons of value out of this, you know? I think just like these sorts of mid-range decks often go too little to beat the other mid-range decks and not big enough to beat the aggro decks. So it just didn't line up as well because we don't have as many high impact 2-drops as we would in, say, a larger format. So that's why I think this card, like, I don't think this card would have turned out very good even if people had played it. But I guess we'll never know because people didn't play it.
Yeah, I think if we had, I could definitely see it though as like.
I could see it.
We have like experienced creatures. It could have been good in craft. I think the
lifelink to me is what makes it like feel like could get there.
Especially like in an aggro versus aggro mirrors. I think it's just to look on a. I think the 3 mana is just an awkward spot on the curve.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, still a solid card. Okay, next up, this is definitely a pet card of mine that I wish I'd taken the time to brew around. Fugue's Quantity. It's black browbeat, pretty much.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that we don't exactly have like a large suite of burn, but I think we have enough that like you could build an aggressively oriented deck where like this. You
splash this in your red deck, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's
one of the cards where like it's not insane by any means, and we've seen how it plays in other formats, but I think it should be seeing more than the 0 play that it is. Or it should have been applied more than the 0 that it was.
Browbeat's always been, like, fine, I think. Like, I mean, basically, you get to... It's always just very binary to me. Like, you get to the point where your opponent has to give you 3 cards, or they die. And then you draw 3 cards, and then they die, because you drew some burn. So, it's like... It's not actually a very interesting card to me, but like if you can build a deck that makes it do what you want, then like it's a great card, very strong, yeah.
For sure. Okay, and the last card on our list is Incandescent Rain. This is a 2-red, I believe, in its custom standard tenure. It was quite good there. I think here we have Rune Mage's Wrath for a straight up 3 mana 1 red Wrath, if that's what you're in the market for. I think that lots of people were playing the 1 red, deal 1 damage, exile creatures that died this way card as like an anti-aristocrats thing, where I feel like this could also have had game as a way to just like, hey, you kill the token makers and the tokens they produce, and you get to kill some of the utility creatures.
So I think that this card received the appropriate amount of play, because I think the other cards in the board line are just better against what aggro decks need to deal with. The problem with this card against experience in particular is like you need to just kill the things. Like instant speed is nice, but at the end of the day you need your sweepers to kill the things you're trying to kill. And the problem is that experienced creatures, especially if you're on the draw, will grow big enough to outstrip this card. Yeah. So like you just at the end of the day you need your card to kill things, and this card unfortunately does not.
No, that's why I think specifically for aristocrats, I think it could have been a better.
Against aristocrats, maybe, but I think the exile portion is pretty big, actually. And costing 1 mana is a lot better than costing 3.
See, my logic is like I agree, but I think that like there are definitely like a lot of board situations where you actually save yourself more life by just like killing the tokens that would have been left behind / killing their 2-drops than you would by just exiling the creature and not letting them have the Blood Artist trigger. Because they don't have recursion otherwise. So it only really matters... The exile only really matters if, A, they have a Blood Artist... Or it only matters in a specific situation where they have a Blood Artist, but they don't have a sack outlet. So...
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this card's bad. I think, like, it's basically just Flame Sweep, which is a fine card. Because I don't think you ever play this in a scenario where, like, oh, I just want to put a -1/-1 counter on things, you know? Like, I mean, I guess it can stick around on some creatures that don't happen to die, which isn't terrible. I don't know, I think it's, like, fine. I'm not shocked that it didn't see more play, I guess is what I'm saying.
For sure. Okay, and with that, those are all of the cards that we wanted to talk about with this retrospective. Vastuum was a dope set in both the formats it's in. I hope it sees play in other custom constructed formats in the future. And yeah, it's a pretty neat piece. It's a pretty neat set overall. Has a long history, and I think. Thank you,
Vastuum. We missed.
Yeah, again, there's a lot. I wish that it could have done in its time. But yeah, hopefully the next time around it gets into a standard format, custom bigger, that can explore all of these cool options. But yeah, do you have anything you want to say before we sign off?
Not really. Just hope everyone's looking forward to the upcoming rotation. And make sure to, I guess the lesson here is just try more cards. Oftentimes there are a lot of good cards that people don't play.
For sure. But yeah. With that, thanks for watching, and this is going to be Kayiu and Dodger signing off.